Love, courage, and hope beneath the skies of rock falls. An emotional journey of fearless hearts. Asterisk the train screeched as it slowed. Metal grinding against the tracks like a tired sigh. Steam hissed up around the wheels, curling into the cool morning air. A voice called out flatly from inside. Rock Falls. End of the line. Jake Cunningham stood. His boots touched the worn wooden floor as he grabbed the same old canvas bag he carried through mud, blood, and months of war. His coat hung loose on his frame, weathered and faded. The kind of look that said he'd seen too much and carried. Even more, he stepped off the train onto a creaking platform, the boards groaning under his weight. The air smelled like fried grease, old tobacco, and quiet. Real quiet, the kind that presses into your chest. No one was waiting for him.
No, kids.
Running up, no wives with warm baskets, no handshakes or hellos. Just a dog barking once in the distance, then silence. A man selling water by the track squinted at Jake, like he might recognize him but didn't want to admit it. Two men leaned near a barn, watching without speaking. Jake kept walking, eyes scanning, calm but sharp. The town hadn't changed much.
But it had gone dim somehow.
Like someone turned the light off and never turned it back on. He walked down the main street. Dust kicked up under his boots. Old shops with faded signs sat half-shuttered. A porch with peeling paint. A broken window with a curtain still hanging on out of habit. Gracie's saloon was still in the corner, leaning a little more than he remembered. One window was cracked. The music inside didn't sound joyful, just tired. A kid sat slumped outside, a half-empty flask in one hand, guitar across his lap. He froze when he saw Jake. Is that him? Someone whispered from the porch of the old bank. Looks like him. Cunningham. Thought he burned at Shiloh. Jake didn't respond. He'd heard voices like that before. Let them talk. His uniform was long gone. But the way he moved, the way his eyes never rested too long in one spot, still said soldier. Still said not done fighting. A few blocks later, he saw it. The house, wood siding chipped. Fence leaning. Steps that creaked before you even stepped on them. But it was home. What was left of it, anyway. On the porch sat Vang, his brother-in-law. Pipe in hand. Paper on his knee, not being read. Just held. When he saw Jake, he didn't move at first. Just stared. Then slowly stood, took the pipe from his mouth, and said, Well, I'll be damned. You're actually alive. Jake gave a tired smile. You're still here. Somebody had to keep the lights on, Vang said. Look after your brother. Feed the horses. Keep this place from falling apart. From the front door stepped Matt Older. Now face more weathered than Jake remembered, but still the same warmth behind his eyes. He didn't speak at first. Just walked up and hugged Jake hard. No words, just a strong grip between two men who had seen hell and made it home somehow. You come far, Matt finally asked. Memphis, train, some walking? Still doing things the hard way? Jake shrugged. Only way I know. Inside, the house smelled like stewed meat and dust. Supper was already on the table, potatoes, beans, a little bread, simple, honest. The kind of meal that didn't need anything fancy to feel like home. Things changed. Matt said, pouring a glass of water. I noticed, Jake replied. Town's gone quiet. Too quiet. It's not like it was. What happened? Matt's eyes dropped to the table. Cross. He's not the sheriff, not even elected, but he runs things. Got a gang. Folks are scared. Real scared. Jake didn't speak. He just set his bag in the corner and sat down. He knew that kind of fear. He'd seen it before in the faces of people trapped behind lines, waiting for someone else to fight. That night, he stepped onto the porch alone. Lit a cigarette, looked out over the town. Off in the distance, footsteps echoed slow, unsure. A shadow moved near the end of the street. Someone watching. Then gone. Vang stepped beside him. You weren't expected here, he said quietly. I figured, Jake said. But that doesn't mean I'm not needed. Neither said more. The wind blew across the empty street, rattling signs and loose shutters. Jake stared out into the dark, not blinking. Not afraid, Dot in his chest. Something stirred Dot. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something quieter. The feeling of unfinished business. Asterisk, the morning came slow in Rock Falls. Not the kind of morning that feels fresh, but the kind where the sun shows. Up tired, like even it didn't want to rise, Jake walked through town again. Same boots, same bag slung over his shoulder. But now people watched a little closer from behind windows. Through cracks in doors, no smiles, no greetings. Just quiet stares that held questions they were too afraid to ask. The town hadn't just changed, it had gone hollow. Gracie's saloon still stood, but the paint was almost all gone from the sign. The windows hadn't been washed in months, maybe longer. Jake pushed the swinging doors open and stepped inside. The air hit him like a wall thick with smoke, sweat, and something bitter underneath. The sound of glasses clinking, chairs creaking. A card game going in the back. Laughter that didn't sound happy, just loud. Cross's men were already there. 4 of them. Leaning back in chairs like they owned the place, they wore those same worn leather vests with the red patch. Like a warning label on a bottle that's already poisoned half the town. Jake didn't flinch. Just picked a table near the wall. Back to the corner. Old habit. One eye on the door. One on the bar. He ordered stew and a beer from the nervous boy working the floor. The kid didn't say much, just nodded and rushed away like talking too long might get him noticed. Then, the room shifted. Not loud, not with a bang. Just that kind of hush that happens when something different walks in. Alice stepped onto the stage. Her dress was simple, maybe the same one from the night before. Hair pulled back. Face calm, but her eyes were sharp like someone who's used to things falling apart and always braced for it. She sat down at the piano like it was the only thing in the room that still made sense. Then she started playing. The notes were soft. No showmanship. No grand opening. Just music, real music. The kind your mother might hum while washing dishes. The kind that slips into your chest without asking permission and makes you remember things you thought you forgot. Then she sang, not loud, not begging for attention. Her voice felt like someone lighting a candle in the dark, small, steady, and warmed. And for the first time since Jake had walked back into Rock Falls, he stopped thinking. He didn't look at the thugs, didn't think about Cross, didn't even think about what might come next. He just listened. Across the room. One of Cross's men slammed his mug too hard. Another let out a whistle, half mocking, half cruel. But Ella didn't flinch, didn't miss a note. She wasn't singing for them. She wasn't singing for applause. She was singing for herself. And somehow, that made it hit even harder. When the last note drifted into silence, no one clapped, not out of disrespect. Just like they didn't know how anymore. Ella stood. Gave a tiny nod, almost like a goodbye, and stepped off the stage. As she walked past Jake's table, their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't look away, just nodded once. Nice voice, he said, soft but clear. She paused. Not long, just enough for him to see the way her jaw tensed. Like she didn't expect anyone to really listen. Thanks, she replied. Most folks don't. I listened, Jake said. I could tell. That was all. She moved on, but the air in the room didn't feel the same anymore. Her voice was still in it, echoing between the dust and the silence. That night, Jake didn't go straight home. Instead, he walked past the saloon, down toward the old stables behind it. He used to feed horses here with his father. Before the war, before everything changed, the woods still smelled of hay and old leather. But there was a strange sound now, frustrated, soft, and trying not to curse. Jake turned the corner. Ella stood there, struggling to saddle a nervous Mare. The horse jerked its head, kicked at the dirt, and Ella's sweat on her brow. Sleeves rolled up was trying to calm her down. You all right? Jake asked, not stepping too close. She gave him a sideways look. Depends. You offering help or judgment? Help, he said simply. She stepped back, let him in. Jake moved slow. One hand on the horse's neck, voice low, calm. Easy there, girl. Not gonna hurt you. The horse twitched, but slowly bit by bit settled. Jake adjusted. The straps, checked the stirrup. Gave the reins a gentle tug. You're good now. She rides steady. Ella watched, arms crossed. Guess some things are easier for you. Not always, Jake replied. Some horses just need time to know you mean no harm. Was that about the horse? She asked. Could be about me.
Or you, or all of us.
They stood there in the quiet, not talking, just breathing the same air, feeling the same wind. Then she said, You coming tomorrow night? I sing again. I'll be there. And just like that, she smiled. Not a full smile, just the beginning of one. The kind that doesn't show teeth but shows hope. Jake watched her ride away. Her dress moving with the breeze, the horse calm beneath her. He didn't say anything. Just watched Dot, and for the first time in a long while, he wanted to be seen. It started with a whisper, just a quiet murmur drifting through the dusty streets of Rock Falls. Jake Cunningham stood up to one of Cross's men. He didn't flinch. He hit him. Right on the bridge. By morning, everybody knew Dot at the general store. Two older women stopped mid-conversation and looked up when Jake walked past. They didn't wave, but they didn't look away either. Outside the blacksmith's, a boy pretending to sweep the porch stopped long enough to say, You really did it, huh? Jake just gave him a quiet nod and kept walking. Dot. It wasn't celebration. Not yet, but something in the air had changed. The silence wasn't as thick anymore. Still, Jake could feel it in the way people looked at him, half hope, half warning. Like they wanted him to keep going, but were scared of what would happen if he did. He stepped into the butcher shop that afternoon for some salt pork. The bell above the door rang flat and dry. Inside, the shopkeeper was slicing meat without looking up. You here to buy or make trouble? The man asked. Just need supper, Jake replied. The butcher slid the wrapped parcel across the counter. Word gets around fast, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. People are saying you're stirring things up. Jake looked at him, calm. I didn't start it. Maybe not, the man said, leaning closer. But you might finish.
Jake didn't answer.
He just picked up the parcel and left. That evening, he found himself walking the edge of town, the sun dipping behind the ridge, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. His feet carried him without thinking past the creek, past the stables, past the old church. And then to her. Ella. She was near the stable again, this time brushing the mare with quiet care. The sky behind her was glowing, and her hair caught the last light like it was made of fire. You came back, she said, not turning around. I said I would. You're good at keeping promises? Not always, Jake replied, but I try. She smiled without showing it. That puts you ahead of most men I've met. He stepped closer. The horse's ears twitched but didn't spook. That alone said something. You were good last night, he said. Better than the first time. I was singing for someone. She replied, almost shy. Did you notice? He nodded slowly.
I did.
They stood there, still and soft, as the wind tugged gently at the dry grass around them. It wasn't romance.
Not yet.
It was something smaller, but stronger trust starting to grow from broken soil. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Used to, Jake said, but not anymore. Why not? Because maybe this place still has something worth
standing up for. She didn't speak,
just looked down at her hands. The silence between them was comfortable this time. Then they heard it. Shout. Loud, from down the street. Jake's head turned instantly. Old habit, his body tensed. Footsteps fast.
Heavy. Another shout.
Then a cry. Jake took off running. He reached the bridge at the edge of town, the same one he crossed just days ago. This time, he wasn't alone. A boy, maybe 10, was on the ground, torn satchel beside him, blood on his lip. Standing over him was one of Cross's men, tall, mean-eyed red patch on his shoulder, Jake.
Didn't even slow down. Hey!
He barked. The man looked up, sneering. Well, look who's feeling brave. War hero thinks he can play sheriff now. He's a kid, Jake said.
Let him go.
His daddy owes Cross, the man growled. We're collecting early. Jake stepped closer, steady. I said let him go. And what if I don't? The man said, raising his chin.
You going to hit me in front of the whole town again? No. Jake replied.
I'm going to remind you what it means to be a man. Then came the punch. Clean. Fast. It hit square in the jaw and dropped the thug like a sack of coal. He rolled on the boards, spitting blood. Jake turned to the boy.
Grab. Your bag. Go home.
The kid didn't move at first. Just stared at Jake, eyes wide, lip trembling. Then he nodded, grabbed the satchel, and ran. Thank you, sir. He shouted over his shoulder. Jake didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just watched him go. The thug sat up, coughing.
You're
a dead man, Cunningham. Jake didn't even look at him. I already know what that feels like. The man limped off, still cursing. Jake stayed there, alone on the bridge, until the sun was gone and the stars started blinking above the hills. By the next day, the town was humming again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else. Shopkeepers nodded when Jake walked past. A girl at the well gave him a flower, then blushed and ran off. Even the preacher, who hadn't said a bold word in months, tipped his hat and said, "May the Lord walk with you." Jake nodded back, but inside he wasn't sure if this was hope or the calm before the next storm. That night, Matt said just one thing over dinner: no turning back now, brother. Jake didn't answer, because he already knew that asterisk the days in rock. Fall started feeling different. Not better, just awake. Jake's name was on people's lips now, not shouted, but spoken in quiet corners. In the saloon, at the mill, outside the church after Sunday prayer. He wasn't just the man who came back from war. He was the man who didn't look away when a boy got hurt. The man who stood up even when everyone else kept their heads down. But hope is a dangerous thing in a place like Rock Falls, because it makes people believe again and cross. He didn't like that. It happened 2 nights later. Jake was already asleep, or trying to be. The days left his body tired, but his mind stayed busy. Images flashing behind his eyes. Smoke, mud, gunshots, faces he'd never see again. Then the smell hit him. Smoke, not from the stove, not from someone's fireplace, from outside. And fast, a shout tore through the quiet. Fire! The barn's on fire! Jake bolted up, heart pounding. He didn't even grab his boots. Just ran. Out the door, the sky was orange. His family's old barn was fully lit, flames reaching high into the black. The wood hissed and popped as the fire consumed it. Hungry and cruel, Matt was already running toward it. Matt, don't! Jake shouted, voice cracking in the heat. But Matt didn't stop. There were still horses inside. Get them out! He yelled back, already swallowed by smoke. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bucket, tossed water at the nearest wall, and followed. Inside was chaos. Wood cracking, horses screaming, fire eating the rafters above. Matt was coughing hard, trying to lead a mare toward the exit. A beam groaned, then snapped overhead. Jake lunged, pulled Matt back just as it crashed down. His brother fell hard, crying out in pain. Jake dragged him by the shoulders, half carrying him out into the dirt. Away from the blaze, Vang came out of the dark, helping to pull the rest of the animals away from the barn. His eyes wide, shirt soaked with sweat.
We got two, he gasped. Other one's still inside. It's too late, Jake said. The whole roof's ready to go. They all stood there, watching the last of the barn collapse, flames curling into the sky like angry fingers. Matt was lying on the ground, teeth clenched, arm twisted under him. Jake knelt beside him. Let me see, he said. Matt's shirt. Sleeve was burned halfway through. The skin beneath, raw, cracked, blistered. The smell of it made Jake want to throw up. I'm sorry, Matt muttered, voice shaking. I thought I had time. You did what anyone would, Jake said, gently covering the wound with a rag. We'll fix this. Then came the sound of boots, not running, strolling. Confident Dot from the shadows, 3 figures, appeared. One of them lit a cigar with a piece of burning straw. Jake stood, his eyes narrow. One of the men tipped his hat. Heard you had a little accident. Jake didn't speak. Real shame, the man continued. Nice barn. Would have lasted another 10 years if someone hadn't left a lantern burning. Vang stepped forward, fists clenched. You did this. The man smiled. Cross just once. Things quiet. But folks been talking too loud lately. Thought maybe it was time to remind them who's in charge. Jake stepped between them. You burned my land, he said, voice low. You hurt my brother. And now you show up smiling like it's nothing? The man exhaled smoke. We didn't hurt anyone. Fire did that. Jake's hands tightened into fists, but Matt was still on the ground. And Ella hadn't shown up yet. And something in the man's eyes said, go ahead, make a move. They wanted him to swing. Wanted a reason. Jake didn't give it to them. You made your point, he said. Double quote. Oh, we're just getting started, the man said. Next time, it won't be your barn. He flicked the cigar into the dirt and turned to leave. The others followed. Jake didn't move. He stood there, watching them disappear back into the dark. His breath sharp and his heart like a drum inside his chest. Behind him. Matt groaned again. Vang crouched to help him. Then, footsteps. Fast ones. Ella came running from the road, hair messy, blouse half-buttoned, a leather satchel bouncing at her side. What happened? She asked, already kneeling at Matt's side. Fire, Jake said. Cross's message. She didn't ask more. Just opened her bag, pulled out gauze, alcohol, salve. Her hands were steady. Her eyes clear. She worked fast. This will burn. She warned Matt. I'm already burning, he said through gritted teeth. I know, she whispered, wiping the wound with careful hands. Jake watched her, silent. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. She just acted. When Matt was finally resting, bandaged and half-conscious, Ella stood and looked at Jake. You okay? She asked. Jake shook his head. No, but I know what I have to do. She didn't try to stop him. Come back, she said simply. He looked at her, the flicker of fear behind her eyes, and nodded. I will. Then he turned and walked. Toward the edge of the yard, into the night, smoke still trailing into the stars behind him. He didn't look back, because something inside him had changed, and this time, there was no turning back. Morning came heavy. Ash still floated in the breeze like black snow. The barn was gone. Just a skeleton of charred beams and cracked earth. The smell lingered, smoke, burned wood, and something deeper. Lost. Jake didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, coat draped across his knees, eyes red but dry. Every now and then he looked out toward the edge of town, like waiting for a storm only he could see, then came out just after dawn. Didn't say a word. Just handed Jake a cup of black coffee and sat beside him. For a long time, they just stared out at nothing. Finally, Vang said, You're not going to let this go, are you? Jake took a sip. No. Vang nodded once, slow. Didn't think so. A beat? Then let's do it right. Jake didn't gather a crowd. He didn't give speeches. He didn't hang flyers. He went one by one. Quiet, careful. To men he trusted, not because they were loud.
But because they'd already stood for something when it counted. First was Clint Holloway. Jake found him out by the pastures, hammering horseshoes beside a broken down wagon. Big hands, quiet eyes. A man who said little but saw everything. You still ride like hell when it counts? Jake asked, stepping into the light. Clint turned, squinting into the sun. Then a slow smile. Well, I'll be... Didn't think you'd stay this long. Jake stepped closer. Barn's gone. Matt's burned bad. Cross is moving in on everyone now, even kids. Clint dropped his hammer. So you're ready, not for war, Jake said. Just something that matters. Clint grabbed a canteen, wiped his hands. You want my help, you got it. Just say when. One down. Next was Joe Murphy, an old sapper Jake had served with. Now he repaired wagon wheels and drank quietly behind the blacksmith shop. Jake found him stacking crates in the heat, whistling an old army tune. When he saw Jake, he didn't ask questions. Cross, Joe said simply. Jake nodded. I'm in, Joe said, without hesitation. I still owe you for Shiloh. We both came back, Jake replied. Doesn't mean the debt's paid. Joe stuck out his hand. Jake took it, firm. Real. Two down. The third visit was the hardest. Dr. Sam Boseman. Once a field medic, now a limping, gray-haired man with a chest cough that sounded like dry gravel. Jake found him on the porch of his clinic, wrapped in a faded wool blanket, a half-read book in his lap. You knew I'd come, Jake said. I may be slow, but I ain't blind, Sam answered, closing the book. Jake sat beside him. I need men who still remember what it means to stand up, even if they can't stand for long. Sam chuckled, the cough rising in his throat. Boy, I can't run across the street without falling over. I don't need runners, Jake said. I need someone who still gives a damn. The old man went quiet, looked out at the hills. Then he nodded. Don't ask me to climb anything, but I can still shoot when my hands don't shake. Jake smiled. Good enough. 3 down. Back at the house, the sun was falling low. Jake stood under the awning, sleeves rolled, dirt on his hands. The wind had picked up a little. It whistled through the burnt boards of the old barn like a ghost. Trying to speak. Clint arrived first. Then Joe. Then Sam. And last, Vang, carrying a crate of old tools. Eyes steady but tired. Even Ella showed up. She didn't say anything. Just walked up the steps, handed Jake a tin cup of something hot, and stood beside him. Jake looked at them. All. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were farmers. Blacksmiths. Old men. But every one of them had something left. Something that mattered. Jake cleared his throat, kept his voice low. I'm not asking you to fight for a flag, or a badge, or revenge. He looked toward the town. I'm asking you to stand for the people who can't, for the ones who whisper instead of speak, for the ones who've already buried too much. Joe nodded. Ain't about guns. It's about the ground we walk on. Exactly, Jake said. We don't need to win. We just need to remind Cross that not every man out here is afraid to die standing. The wind shifted again, dry, warm, carrying the scent of the last summer before a long winter. Sam raised his mug. To the ones who still stand, he said quietly. They all lifted something, a cup, a hand, a tool. Ella looked at Jake, then spoke. For the first time that evening, I don't know how to shoot, she said, but I know how to stay. Jake looked at her, tired, bruised, burned out from years of wandering. But she was still here. You being here, he said, might be the bravest thing anyone's done yet. She smiled, barely. Then we're all in trouble. They all chuckled, soft but honest. That night, as the lanterns flickered and the stars settled into their places, Jake sat alone on the porch one last time. In his hands, a letter from the past. A photo, a name. He folded them up gently, tucked them back into the wooden box, and whispered to the dark, I'll carry this. All of it, but I won't carry it alone anymore. The wind answered with nothing, but that silence didn't feel empty. Now, it felt like readiness, like the kind of stillness right before the earth shifts, because come morning, Rock Falls would remember what it felt like when men stood tall, even when no one else did. Asterisk the land was quite again too quiet, but not in the way it had been before, not the silence of fear. This was the kind of quiet that came before something. Old was about to break. Something bigger than anger, stronger than fear. It was the sound of men who had decided enough was enough. Jake stood at the ridge with his back to the rising sun. The wind pulled gently at his coat. Below, the narrow pass curved between two low hills, gusty, exposed, the perfect place to make a statement. It wasn't a battlefield. But it would do. Behind him, 5 men crouched in the brush. Not soldiers, not anymore. Just men with reasons. Clint, steady hands, and a rifle that hadn't seen war since the mountains. Joe, silent and breathing slow, his boots braced in. The dirt like he'd never left the trenches. Vang, Jake's brother-in-law, tired eyes, but fists like bricks. Levi, a young farmer whose father had been taken by Cross's men in the night, never seen again. And Sam, old, coughing, bleeding in one lung and half blind in the left eye, but gripping a shotgun like it was part of him. Jake checked his pocket watch. It was nearly time. They'll be coming from the west, Clint whispered. 6 riders, 2 wagons, one of them's Cross. Jake nodded. This isn't about wiping them out, he reminded them. This is about showing them we're done. Whispering, he looked over the group, meeting every eye. You see someone going for a weapon, shoot. If they run, let them run. We don't need to kill everyone to be remembered. Sam gave a raspy chuckle. Still giving orders like you're wearing a badge. I'm just tired of watching good people hide, Jake said. Then they heard it. The distant clatter of hoofs, wagon wheels, muffled voices, laughter. The convoy was coming. Jake moved to the edge of the hill, crouched low. One of the wagons had crates stacked high, supplies, maybe weapons. The other wagon carried men, armed, alert, but not expecting a fight. Cross himself rode out front, sitting too tall in his saddle, like man convinced the road already belonged to him, but today it didn't. Levi breathed deep. You sure about this? No, Jake said, but I'm sure I can't walk away. Levi nodded and pulled the trigger. The first shot dropped one of the riders clean off his horse. The man hit the ground like a sack of flour, rifle flying from his hands. The others shouted, scattering. Then the hillside lit up. Jake fired. Clint followed. Joe let off 2 rounds like he was back in uniform. Vang rolled from cover and took aim at the second wagon's wheel, blew it apart in one clean shot. Chaos. Exploded. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Cross cursed and ducked low, riding hard toward the trees at the rear. His voice tore through the air. Fall back, regroup. But it was too late. Jake jumped down from the hill and ran into the fray, boots kicking up dirt. He dropped one of the guards with a shoulder hit, grabbed the reins of a spooked horse, and sent it barreling into another rider. Behind him, the second wagon cracked open, crates spilling, sawdust flying. Then came Sam. He stepped out, limping, coughing, a bundle of dynamite under one arm and a match in his mouth. Move! He barked at Jake, turned in time to see him toss the bundle beneath the front wagon. The fuse hissed. One of Cross's men turned, saw it too late. The explosion wasn't big, but it was enough. The wagon blew, wood splintering into the dust. Men hit the ground. One of the horses reared, unseating its rider and bolting for the tree line. Smoke rolled through the pass like fog, hiding everything in a haze of gray. And then it was over. A single shot cracked. Then silence. Jake stood in the middle of it all. Dust settling around him, rifle still in hand, blood on his coat. His chest rose and fell with slow, deep breaths. He scanned the field. Levi was down but breathing. Clint knelt beside him, checking for wounds. Joe was limping but still holding his weapon. Sam was leaning against a broken wagon, pale, but grinning like a madman. Cross had escaped, galloped off toward the woods. Wounded but alive, Jake let him go. This wasn't about revenge. Not today. Vang stepped up beside him, wiping sweat from his brow. "We did it," he said. Jake didn't answer right away. He looked over the bodies. Over the wreckage? Over the rifles and hats lying in the dirt. "We started it," he said quietly. That night, back at the house, Jake sat in the yard with Ella beside him. She didn't speak. She just sat close, legs tucked up under her dress. Hair loose from the wind. Jake finally said, "Gil, come back harder." "I know," she replied. "But now the town knows someone stood up." Jake turned to her. "It's not just about Cross anymore. It's about fear. That silence people live in. It's a sickness." Ella reached over, took his hand. "Then let's make some noise." He looked down at their fingers, tangled without effort. Then up at the stars. One had started to fall. Trailing light through the dark. Jake watched it go. And somewhere deep in his chest, under the scars and the weight, he felt something. Rise. Not fire. Not rage. Something gentler. Hope. But far beyond the hills. Cross was already regrouping. And this time, he wouldn't just come back angry. He'd come back to finish it. Asterisk, it didn't take long for Cross to return. Jake knew he would. Men like him didn't run, they circled back. Angry, wounded, and twice as cruel. But Jake was done waiting, done hiding behind fences and fear, done hoping someone else would make it right. So he waited where it mattered most. On the old wooden bridge at the edge of town. The same bridge where he had first stood up. The same place where Rock Falls had started remembering how to breathe. The boards groaned beneath his boots. Wind tugged at his coat. Across the dry creek bed, the town was silent. Folks watching from behind windows, behind prayers. Holding their breath, Jake stood alone. He wasn't armed like a hero, just his revolver, a single rifle slung over his shoulder. But his eyes, they said everything. No anger, no panic. Just a quiet that cut deeper than steel. And then they came. First, the riders, 8 of them. Slow and steady. Dust curling around their boots, like smoke from a fire not yet lit. All wore the same patch on their shoulders, the blood-red X of Cross's gang. Then came Cross. He didn't ride in fast or loud. He moved like a man arriving for a funeral. Boots. Hit the bridge with purpose. Every step heavier than the last. He stopped a few feet from Jake, close enough to speak. "Far enough to draw?" "Well now," Cross said, voice low and mocking. "Look at you, all dressed up, waiting to die." Jake didn't move. "You came. That's all I needed." Cross gave a slow, twisted smile. "You think one little win in a canyon full of dust makes you something?" Jake shook his head. "No. But it reminded this town that fear has limits." Cross let out a dry laugh. "Fear is the only real law left. Then maybe it's time we change the law." The wind shifted. Behind Cross, his men began to fan out, hands near holsters. But they weren't laughing. Not anymore. Not after what Jake had done. Not after the convoy. Some of them looked nervous. Cross took one step closer. "So what now, soldier?" Jake didn't blink. "You leave," he said. "And you don't come back." Cross scoffed. "You going to stop me?" Jake's voice dropped even lower. "Not alone." At that moment, movement stirred at the edge of the bridge. First Clint, stepping out from the trees with his rifle cocked. Then, Joe crouched behind a crate with sharp eyes and a steady aim. Then Vang, standing tall at the top of the hill, arms crossed, not hiding. Then Levi. Then Ella, she walked out slow, hands at her sides, eyes locked on Jake, like she wasn't afraid of anyone but losing him. Cross looked around, jaw tightening. "This your little army?" Jake nodded. No uniforms. No medals. But they've already bled for this place. That makes them more than you'll ever be. You think this ends with a speech? Cross growled. You think I'm walking away because you brought a girl and a couple of has-beens? Jake took one step forward, slow and final. I think. He said, if you don't walk now, you'll leave this bridge in a pine box. Cross's face twitched. His hand moved. So did Jake's. One shot. That's all it took. Not dramatic, not slow motion. Just real, sharp, final. Cross staggered back, eyes wide, like he didn't believe it. Then he dropped. Hard. Flat. Dead. Behind him. The other men didn't move, not at first, but one by one, they dropped their weapons. A rifle. A knife. A pistol. The sound of metal hitting wood echoed through the town like a bell. It wasn't victory. It wasn't cheering. It was quiet. Relief. The kind that doesn't shout. It just breathes. Jake stood. Still, hand lowering the gun, breath steady. Smoke curled from the barrel. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear. From the weight of it finally falling off. Ella stepped forward. Not fast, not dramatic. Just real. She didn't say anything. Just reached out and took his hand. His skin was still warm from the shot. Still shaking, but she held on. Tight. Firm. Certain. And Jake, for the first time in years, didn't pull. Wait, he didn't look behind him. Didn't look at the crowd slowly emerging from their homes. He just looked at her. And in her eyes. He saw something he hadn't seen since before the war. Not love. Not yet. But peace. A place to begin. The days that followed were quiet and the right. Ways. No more guns. No more threats. Just nails and wood. Hammers rebuilding. Laughter returning in. Pieces. The saloon opened its doors wider. Music didn't sound tired anymore. It sounded lived in. Honest. Children played outside the post office. Horses returned to the fields. The bell at the church rang again. This time not for mourning, but to call folks back to something like hope. Jake fixed fences. Helped rebuild the barn. Stopped carrying a gun on his hip, but kept it close. Just in case. At night, he sat. With Ella on the porch. No need to talk all the time. Sometimes she hummed softly, just for herself. Sometimes he whittled a bit of wood into nothing, just to keep his hands busy. One night, she looked over and said, "You staying this time?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She smiled. "Good. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Just shared." The kind of quiet that only happens when two people finally feel safe enough to stop running. And one morning, weeks later, Jake walked up into the attic. He opened the same old box. Inside, a photo, worn, bent at the edges. A woman with kind eyes, a ghost from another life. He held it for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you," and put it away, not to forget, but to let go. Because this time, he wasn't carrying the weight alone. And because the skies above Rock Falls weren't gray anymore. They were open and blue, and quiet in the way that made a man believe again, not just in peace, but in tomorrow.